The WRAITH Rock Lighthouse, a maritime tale of the supernatural by Dominic. This audiobook is profoundly dedicated to my beloved wife, Helen Frances Graham, my son, Jonathan Christopher James, and my beautiful daughter, Hannah Helena Margaret. Also, to all those others I love, and to those I have loved and lost. Introduction. It was in the twilight hours of Christmas Eve, 1867, when Cyrus Fernsby first caught sight of the tapering square towered lighthouse on WRAITH Rock from the large rowing boat which was conveying him to what was intended to be a short-term keeper posting. As it emerged with ever more clarity from within the Atlantic sea mist, and the spray of the crashing waves which embraced it, an inexplicable and undeniable sense of foreboding began to seize and permeate the innermost reaches of his soul. Despite the magnificence of its structure and apodictic aesthetic beauty, the WRAITH Rock Lighthouse exuded an irrefragable melancholic malevolence as it rose in spectral majesty from the turbulent ocean, standing quasi-incandescent beneath the meniscus December moon. Nothing could have prepared him for the revelations and events which were about to unfold. Through snow and mist on Yuletide Eve in 1867, young Cyrus Fernsby rowed towards the post he'd there been given, a lighthouse standing tall and stark amid Atlantic swell, atop the fateful rock of WRAITH, once called the mouth of hell. Moored aside the ragged reef, he disembarked the Stroud, assisted by its crew of two, whilst time and tide allowed. "Ahoy, the light!" they loudly yelled, as dusk began to fall, when sudden chaos then ensued within a vicious squall. In wuthering wind, with turning tide, the crew were forced to leave, returning to the tender ship, relieved at such reprieve. They rowed into the tempest, after swiftly leaving shore, whilst trying to disguise a fear they'd never felt before. Relentlessly the blizzard raged as Cyrus strained his eyes. Then, horror-struck, he stood aghast to see the Stroud capsize. The ghastly sound of stifled screams now thundered in his head. Their sudden silence through the gale affirmed the crew were dead. "Ahoy!" he yelled aloud in vain, with certainty denied. In dissonance he called once more, then hung his head and cried. The boat was shattered on the rocks, midst veils of gelid spray, devoured with ruthless rancour by the crashing waves of grey. He turned away and looked above, bewildered and distraught, the sentinel of WRAITH's vile rock now plaguing every thought. Its baleful form loomed through the ha amidst a shroud of snow, and light which filled its lantern room effused a spectral glow. Cyrus grabbed his canvas bag and ventured to the tower, its iron stairway set in stone like some menacious bower. The howling gale and frigid flakes impeded his advance, the swirling swathe of searing snow a cruel, demonic dance. With cautious steps o'er the rocks, at last he reached the stairs, whilst dreaming of a blazing fire to there cremate his cares. "Ahoy!" he once again exclaimed, with weak dyspneic breath, but all that came to greet him was an ancient heir of death. The untamed tempest, savage tide, consumed the rugged shore, while Cyrus scaled the glacial flight that led towards the door. As if by some phantasmal force, his climb was e'er deterred, with evanescent whispered words of Delphic portent heard. At last he reached the lighthouse door, fatigued and in a daze, then turned its frozen handle with its black star sapphire glaze. With creaking crepitation he forced the door ajar, there pushing hard with all his might, more sanguine now by far. Exhausted, he then fell inside, encased in algid sleet, weakly pushing closed the door, once rising to his feet. His paltry sack of chattels was abandoned on the floor, as he scanned this bleak sub-cellar that unnerved him to the core. Lit dimly by a single lamp, hung high on rusted nails, initial shocking shadowed shapes disclosed benign details. Whale oil barrels, stores, and tools were uniformly stacked, and grain sacks by the stairway newel were tied and tightly packed. He lifted off the meagre light and called again, "Ahoy!" But silence was the sole reply to there his hope destroy. With vexing trepidation he embarked on his ascent, while holding forth the lantern, filled with circumspect intent. Bathed within a ghostly glow and salty fetid air, young Cyrus reached the cellar, permeated with despair. He held aloft the lantern as he slowly scanned the room, which revealed an umbral figure lurking deep within the gloom. Petrified, he held his breath, now frozen to the spot. With eyes wide shut he gazed aghast, appalled and overwrought. Emerging slightly, oh so slow, the figure soon came clear. With scarred and shackled black-skinned limbs it shuffled ever near. Then suddenly, in but a blink, it darted to his side, and stood with wide-eyed purpose, leaving nowhere he could hide. Then raising up its wizened arms, with fingers gnarled and splayed, it cupped its hands around his head as Cyrus cowardly prayed. A fulgent flash then filled his mind, as prelude to a dream. A nightmare, rife with horrors, now resounded like a scream. A sinking slave ship wrecked by WRAITH thrashed helpless on the rocks, while crew held slaves below the deck, secured with iron locks. This ship they called the Loosebrook had set sail from Aniho, which is near the Gulf of Guinea in southeastern Togo. Hugh Holland was the captain of a crew of scurvy knaves, a mean, malicious monster who defiled the ocean waves. With broken-hearted anguish, Cyrus dropped upon his knees, as he wailed through tears of sorrow, for these souls he must appease. At once the room grew colder, as a mist suffused the air, morphing swiftly into human forms, till slaves stood everywhere. A sea of stricken faces stared with pained and piercing eyes, as cacophonous bewailing filled his mind with clamant cries. With a frightful fiery pageant passing stark before his soul, he glimpsed his own reflection, bound by chains as black as coal. Howling harsh in horror as the veil began to fall, he could see beyond his fading fugue the awful truth of all, though none except the broken heart could know the pain he felt, as with the shroud which broke apart a destined blow was dealt. The atrocious revelation, which was now as clear as day, dismembered his identity as would a bird of prey. He collapsed in fetal frailty, laying curled upon the floor, plunging headlong into madness to be lost for evermore. A raft of fettered ebon hands then claimed him from the void, restoring his propriety, lest be yet ere destroyed. They raised him back upon his feet, then stood in quiet respite, as Cyrus faced his prior life to now himself indict. A stream of raw remembrance was now flooding through his mind, the repugnant recollections of the life he'd left behind. Then, with absolute awareness, inescapably resigned, acknowledged his past avatar, cared naught for humankind. Self-loathing overtook his soul like squalls of raging sea, till Cyrus Fernsby evanesced by heavenly decree, now retrogressed in spirit to his former opprobrium. Hugh Holland of the Loosebrook to atonement must succumb. With eyes transfixed upon their foe, they held aloft their chains, as tortured tears of many years reflected all their pains. As if in mercy, blessed with grace, he knew to set them free, required complete contrition, as his heart contained the key. He raised his head and closed his eyes, awash with saline shame, then begged for absolution whilst accepting total blame. Again he fell upon his knees, with hands clasped to his breast, and prayed to free the captive souls he had callously oppressed. At once the room was empty, midst a burst of golden light, as a myriad of eagles now ensphered the tower in flight. Then, whilst gazing through the window at this enigmatic sight, the eagles also vanished in the bleak December night. As though an angel whispered soft and gently in his ear, in but moments he then realized there was nothing left to fear. He knew the mystic eagles were the souls of all his crew, now freed from their damnation and the void in which they flew. Captain Holland climbed the tower, inspecting every room, wondering who maintained the light still shining through the gloom. The argand lamp shone brightly, though devoid of human aid, in contrast with his umbrous heart he'd had so long betrayed. Ascending to the apex, he then paused and truly prayed, atop the lanthorn balcony, mid-nocturnal serenade. As the winter wind-song wuthered round the storm panes of the light, he felt the touch of tender hands, ethereal and slight. Timidly he turned his head, forlorn and woe-begone, astonished at the sight beheld betwixt the breaking dawn. The sweet seraphic countenance he'd thought for ever lost had somehow death defeated, that the great divide be crossed. Standing now before him was the daughter he'd adored, who had perished with pneumonia, that he ne'er thought see restored. Her death killed all compassion, and his heart was turned to stone. Thus life became his enemy, and love was overthrown. With eyes as bright as diamonds, with the wisdom of beyond, she looked at him with sorrow, for the hate her death had spawned. He threw his arms around her, as he cried 1,000 tears, and begged for her forgiveness for his wrathful wasted years. His daughter's name was Hannah, being 7 when she passed, had halted halcyonic days he thought would ever last. She ushered him to follow her and view the rocks below. He did as bid, and there could see a corpse within the snow. Thunderstruck, he stared aghast, as truth crashed through his core, now knowing he and Cyrus were corporeally no more. She held his hand in comfort as he faced the facts implied. The Stroud had been demolished, and that all her crew had died. Now graced with understanding, with the wheel of life revealed, his heart remembered kindness, and his oversoul was healed. Then, smiling at his daughter, as they faded hand in hand, transcended from the rock of Wraith to God's eternal land. This has been The Wraith Rock Lighthouse, a maritime tale of the supernatural by Barry Dominic Graham. Narrated by Peter Baker. Copyright 2018 by Barry Dominic Graham. Production copyright 2018 by Barry Dominic Graham.